All right. Well, thank you all for being here today. As Mark said, this is our second of these mini workshops. We're not even quite sure what we're going to call these yet, but that's what we're going for right now. So I'm going to present for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion as well. And then in a few days, we will have this video and a resources page posted to our CAT the CAT wiki for folks to reference whether or not they were able to attend today. All right, so today I'm going to talk specifically about classroom AI policies, and I'm going to really stress the fact that we're talking today about the classroom policies, since we've had a lot of discussion going on for the past year about the issue of or the possibility of larger university level policies. So we're going to focus today really on that on the policies for the individual classroom. When we talk about classroom AI policies, we often kind of break things down into this permissive versus restrictive binary, right? And somebody's either got a permissive policy that allows students to use AI to some degree in their classes, and other faculty have a policy that says they can't use it, right? And I'm going to suggest to you today that the challenge we're dealing with is not just picking one or the other of those two, because there's a whole lot more nuance that needs to be considered. But the challenge really is trying to understand why different approaches to these policies work in different contexts, right? And so we need to think about the context of the class that we're talking about. And one thing I really stress here is that I would argue that you need to think about policy for each of the classes that you teach, as opposed to having just one policy that transports to all of your classes. Because as we're going to talk about here, what you're trying to accomplish in a given class should have an impact on how you approach AI use by students in that class. Before we do that, I do want to acknowledge the uncertainty that we are all dealing with here as faculty, right? This is an rapidly evolving technology that none of us, I think, most of us were not expecting we were not expecting to have to deal with this just a few years ago. And then it kind of came out of nowhere, and it's just been kind of this downhill snowball since then, right? So there's a lot of, I think, stress and anxiety that go along with that uncertainty. And what I'm going to present to you here is not a prescriptive answer. And I'm not going to say this is the policy you should use or this is the approach you should take. I'm going to try to present to you a framework that you can use to help you make informed decisions about the policies that you are going to use or have for your classes. That framework really breaks down into three, I think, broad and unique questions. And I'm going to go into each of these in the next few slides, but just kind of a quick overview. These are all questions that, as you're sitting down to figure out the policy for your class, you should be asking yourself and really kind of working through so that you understand your thinking for these things, right? So what is it that you're trying to achieve with that class? What is the context in which you are teaching that class? And what kind of AI use can support learning for that class? So let's kind of dive into each of those and talk about them a little more thoroughly. So we really need to define our actual goals when we're thinking about a policy. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest stressors with AI, which is that I think for most of us, we came out of grad school, we came into teaching really understanding clearly what academic integrity looked like in our classes and should look like in our classes, right? And we didn't have to spend a whole lot of time navigating much terrain, right? Cheating is cheating, right? Plagiarism is plagiarism, right? Those are pretty straightforward. I realize there's some nuance to it and there's some challenges to it, but they are pretty straightforward and they've not changed much over the years. Technology has not really had much of an impact on those. It's made them a little bit easier for students to do, right? We've also had some technology that has helped us detect it a little bit better, but it's not been this huge kind of complex issue we've had to deal with. One of the things I think we'd all agree with within our class is whatever we're teaching, we're dealing with a couple of dual objectives. One is that we want to reduce academic misconduct. We want to kind of admit that we can't eliminate academic misconduct entirely, but we want to reduce it as much as possible. And we want to support meaningful learning. Those are two goals of really any college classroom, regardless of the content, regardless of the structure, regardless of how the course is taught. One key area of research that you should keep in mind, and this is pretty prominent, that kind of came out of the research that I was doing with this, which is that a student's personal ethical beliefs, right, their moral compass, is going to be a significantly better predictor of their behavior with AI use than their awareness of any policy. Right? So basically, whatever policy you've got, you can read it to the class however many times you want to, right? You can give as many quizzes on the policy as you want to. You can do treasure hunts about it. You can do discussions about it. Whatever you do with your, any kind of policy to make sure the students know it, knowing the policy and knowing that the policy exists is not going to affect their behavior as much as their own ethical framework and attitude towards artificial intelligence. And that is a big shift, I think, for us. It's probably a shift we should have made years ago with academic misconduct and academic integrity, which is moving from these are the rules that you have to follow to shaping our students' ethical understandings of why the rules are in place. Obviously, that's a heavier lift and a much more complex issue as well. Right? It's easy to read the rules. It's much more difficult to help a student kind of change their ethical framework. And then another thing to think about when you're thinking about what you're trying to accomplish is, and the goals of your course and your policy, is that different fields have different relationships with these AI tools that are coming out. And they also have different attitudes and norms towards those AI policies. And so one thread you'll see throughout this is thinking about how does this use or misuse, right, or ban from use fit into the disciplinary discussion, the disciplinary norms that we are all experts at, right? We're all experts in our disciplinary areas. So those are some of the issues that we really need to think about, the goals we need to think about when we ask ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish with this? This is probably one of the most challenging aspects, which is to really kind of figure out the context in which you're teaching the class. And one issue of context is just the class itself. What are the goals of the class, right? And how does that policy fit in with those goals, right? But the other context you need to think about is where the class is being taught. What is the attitude and what is the infrastructure of the program or department that you're in? Right? What is the attitude or infrastructure of the college or the university as well? Right? And so research kind of suggests this idea of a maturity continuum for different institutions, right? We can have the early stage, which means no clear boundaries have been put into place, right? So the institution, again, whether it's the university itself or college or even a department or a program, have not clearly said, this is what's appropriate within this area. And that makes it even more difficult for faculty to figure out their own policies. If we don't know what's appropriate in the dean's, as far as the dean's concerned, or as far as the provost's concerned, or whatever the case may be, or as far as our department head is concerned, we don't know how to figure out what's appropriate for our students. So that early stage. At the far end, you've got the established stage where you've got institutions, where you've got units that have clearly defined policies in place guide rails in place that tell faculty what is appropriate and what is inappropriate for them to do in their own classes. I would say Xavier is somewhere in the middle of those two in that developing stage, right? I think with the completion of that AI statement that's been in the works for the past year, right? I think that establishes some good guardrails for faculty to work within. We know that the university says that AI is understood and can be a useful educational tool if used properly. And we know that the institution says that faculty have the right to determine what's appropriate and inappropriate in their classes. So that alone has kind of established for faculty kind of a clearer path forward. An improved infrastructure would also be training and support for not just faculty, but students and staff in terms of using these tools. We're not quite there yet, although the statement calls for the creation of some support in those regards. Right now, Xavier is not providing faculty and students or staff with access to these AI tools as well. So those of us who are using them are either using the free versions or we're paying out of our own pocket to use these things, right? And so then we don't have that kind of support currently in place. Maybe going down the road, we may. So one reason this is important is because, again, the research shows that for those faculty who want to have permissive policies, for those faculty, like me, who want to incorporate the use of AI into the classes so that the students can figure out and learn how to use it effectively as an educational, as a research tool, right? Those only really work, those permissive policies only really work if that infrastructure is in place. Right? If I'm having to teach the students just how to use an AI tool, right, and from the ground up, if I'm having to figure out what these assignments are going to look like, if I'm going to have to define some of these ethical frameworks all on my own, those policies don't work as well as if the university itself or the college itself, whatever the case may be, has that infrastructure in place. So that's kind of a little bit of a disappointment. But like I said, I think as a university, we are moving in the right direction. And I think we're taking a careful, guarded approach to this stuff. Other schools kind of ran with it. That's for all of us who've been at Xavier for any amount of time know that Xavier doesn't, rush into things. We take our time to kind of figure out these things. So I think we're moving towards having that infrastructure in place. But that needs to be part of your considerations as well, right? In terms of what kind of support, what kind of infrastructure is in place for me and for the students in terms of how this stuff will work in the classroom. The last thing you really kind of need to think about, kind of the big question you need to think about is how can AI be an effective learning tool within this context, even if you're not going to allow it as part of the class, right? You need to define for yourself, you need to define ultimately for your students where you stand on, and you need to make it clear for the students how you interpret AI use, right? Do you see it as replacing the student's thinking, or do you see it as a way to enhance the student thinking? So I've got this kind of spectrum here. I think we would all agree, right, that at one end of the spectrum, right, we've got a student who copies and pastes part or even all of an essay and turns it in as their own, or just downloads an essay, right, and turns it in as their own, is a pretty gross violation of academic integrity. And again, I think most of us would agree that a student who goes to one of these AI chatbots and says, write me an essay for this assignment, and then downloads it or copies and pastes it and turns it in as their own, is in just as much violation of that policy, of that academic misconduct policy, as the other student, right? So it's just two approaches to the same violation. But some faculty, right, we need to think about how AI can be used by students to maybe plan an assignment, to help them edit or revise an assignment, to research an assignment, right? And so as faculty, this is where the policy really comes in. We need to make clear to the students, even if they're not using AI in the class, or even if they're not being assigned to use AI in the class, what can they and can they not do with AI for those activities that are in the class. And then obviously there's a big gray zone in the middle between those two things of how much augmentation is appropriate, right? And how much student ownership is prominent. But I think one thing that we really need to think about with this, and it's not just our kind of gut reactions, but we really need to kind of think about what's going to benefit the students most. And so this is why we really need to be clear with our policies about where we stand in these regards. Is a student who runs their paper through Grammarly cheating for your assignment or not, right? Is a student who runs their paper or research project through some other chatbot to help them kind of organize it better, cheating or not? Again, we need to make those really clear to the students. This is what's really essential to the policies, right? Those guardrails for our particular classes, for our particular assignments, are really essential for our students to understand. So those are the questions you need to kind of think about for yourself. So as you're thinking about these policies, after you've kind of gone through and thought about those questions, about where you are, how you would respond to each of those big questions, kind of across the research that I did for this, there were 3 components for effective policies that really popped out. And again, these are not what's the best policy, but these are just the ideas that need to be included in the policy. So as I was just saying, one is clear boundaries, right? Any AI policy needs to clearly define for the students what is allowed, what's not allowed, and why. And the why is probably more important than anything else. It's not just enough to say you can't use it, but you really need to say you can't use it, and here's why you can't use it. Or if you say you can use it, here's why you can use it. The best thing you can do with this is to connect it to the learning outcomes for the course. And this is why I was saying, we need to think about these policies not for, this is, Dr. Todd's AI policy, but this is Dr. Todd's AI policy for when he teaches English 1020, right? Which is going to be different than when I teach XCore 1000, and which is going to be different than when I teach a senior seminar in the English department. What are the learning outcomes for the class? And then how do these AI rules and permissions or restrictions fit into those policies, those outcomes? We'll just kind of take a minute to note, because it always comes up, the AI detection tools that are out there. I kept coming across things that were suggesting that I should say they need to be used with care. They really shouldn't be used. They are really problematic. They cannot provide anybody with any clear guidance on this was actually produced by AI or not. It's a complete guess. And they have pretty significant problems of bias against students of color. So I would really suggest you just kind of stay away from those altogether. Second component, I'm going to kind of move forward here because I think I'm running a little bit on the long side. Right? We need to shift, like I said at the beginning, from policy enforcement or punishment to education. Right? How are these rules that you're going to put in place for your class going to help the students learn better? And how is misuse, how is violation of those rules going to hinder their learning? And that's, again, this is going to help the students change their ethical approach to these things, right? If they understand that it's not just, it's against the rules, but by doing this, you're affecting your actual learning in the long run, that's going to have a bigger impact on them. And one way we can do this is to frame AI literacy within the discipline, right? This is a discipline-specific skill. This is how somebody within the world of literary analysis can use AI. This is how somebody in the world of drug development and research can use AI, right? This is how somebody within the world of library sciences can use AI. And then the practical support, go back to that idea of the infrastructure that's in place, right? What kind of guidance do the students have for using it? Are you just going to say you can do this and that's it, or you can't do this and that's it? Or are you going to provide them with examples or resources, or can you point them to an office on campus that will help them understand some of these things or not? And faculty, frankly, need to understand how the administration is going to respond to violations against their policies, right? How are the department heads going to respond if we challenge a student's work? How is the dean's office going to respond if we challenge a student's work as well, right? So we need that clear guidance and support at our end as well. So just as we're wrapping up here, and some folks probably don't necessarily want to hear this, but again, the research really shows that the students want some specific support for these things. One thing they want is they want those clear boundaries, and they prefer to have them with permission to use AI, but they want to know to what extent they can use AI in their given classes. If there are restrictions in place about AI use, they really want to know why those restrictions are in place. Just simply saying you're opposed to it, you have a problem with it, you don't like it, that's really not justification, right? How is it hindering their learning? How is it weakening their success in that class and in that educational plan? They want to know the connection to their professional futures. Again, whether it's use or a restriction, right? How is this going to help them in their professional careers going forward? And they want to see the flexibility, right? This generation, better than any of us, knows how quickly technology can change, right? I think a lot of us who have been around for a while are used to technology being a little bit on the slow side, which is strange to say, right? But this generation, I think, is much more used to how quickly this technology is evolving, right? And they want to understand that as the technology evolves and as the norms around that technology evolve, that these policies will evolve along with them. So just kind of a path forward for you all. If you're just kind of starting out, think about those boundaries, figure out what those kind of guardrails are, and what are your permission points. At what point are these things acceptable in your classes? And then think about educational components that you can offer to help students better understand those boundaries and permissions. If you've got some infrastructure in place, and like I said, I think we're moving towards that here at Xavier, right? Maybe you're going to take a more permissive approach, right? Like I said, those permissive approaches really are only successful if there's infrastructure in place. And then kind of for all, whether you're just getting started or whether you've got policies in place, right? We need to understand that these policies, and we need to make clear that these policies are going to and have to evolve. The policy I had in place for AI 3 years ago is meaningless today, right? So I can only imagine what it's going to be like in another 3 years. But you should also remember what you as a faculty member can have control over. You've got control over the language of your syllabus and the framing of that language. You can push the discipline-specific conversation about AI, right, as the expert in your field. Thinking about how you can make assignment design emphasize and demonstrate AI use as a possibility, right? And then having an ongoing dialogue with students about the ethical use, right? Again, it's not enough simply to say it's allowed or it's not allowed, but to have a conversation about the ethics of that use. That's what's really critical. So it probably seems like a lot, and I just want to say it doesn't all have to be done right now, right? You can start small, take a small step, right? You can find some templates, you can find some example syllabi language. Going forward, CAT is going to be providing some of that through our CAT wiki as we're working on that. You can find that on plenty of other websites as you browse around. You can also start small. Maybe just one small part of your policy, maybe just one assignment to just kind of experiment a little bit with this. But then also remember to trust your expertise, right? You know your students, you know the goals of the classes, the objectives of the class you teach, right? And you know your field, right? Those three things together should really be guiding your approach to these policies. All right. There are my sources. These will be a little more, a little easier to read on the CAT wiki page when we get that up.